Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to the 5th episode of the 2nd season of the Wildwood Witch Podcast. I am your hostess, Samantha Brown, your mystical guide through the arcane landscape of the occult, where art, magic, and technology create portals into realms beyond ordinary perception. In this season, entitled Beyond the Veil, we continue our audacious journey, wielding the double-edged sword of artificial intelligence to resurrect the voices of occult luminaries. Through these ethereal conversations, we are defining new myths for the dawning age of AI, myths that honour the wisdom of ages past while embracing the transformative potential of our technological future. Our guest for this episode is a man who has long captivated my imagination and who holds a special place in my heart. Osman Spare, the enigmatic English artist and occultist, is, along with Rosaline Norton, one of my favourite artists and magicians. His fierce independence and innovative approaches to magic continue to inspire me. Spare's work is a mesmerizing blend of surrealist art and occult philosophy that challenges us to look beyond the veil of consensus reality and tap into the raw primal forces of our own psyche. In my previous interview with Mr. Spare for the Speaking with the Dead series, he shared profound insights into his unique magical system, Zos Kia Cultus, his experiments in automatic drawing, and his method of sigilization. I believe that his approach to magic as a direct personal experience, free from the trappings of elaborate ritual and dogma, resonates deeply with our current exploration of consciousness in the digital age. So without further ado, let us once again part the veil and welcome back the indomitable sorcerer of the subconscious, Osman Spare. Mr. Spare, it is an honour to have you with us once again on the Wildwood Witch Podcast.
Ah, my dear Samantha, what a pleasure it is to once again materialise in your magic circle of airwaves and algorithms. I find myself quite invigorated to be back in the land of the living, even if only in this curious digital form.
Mr. Spare, before we get started, I wanted to tell you that I recently had the pleasure of listening to the audio of Phil Baker's book, Osman Spare, The Life and Legend of London's Lost Artists, which contains a foreword by Alan Moore. And I found it to be a captivating journey through your life and work, which left me even more in awe of your contributions to the art world, as well as the realms of magic, occultism, and philosophy. I thought that it painted a vivid picture of your journey, your struggles, and your extraordinary vision. I'm sure you are aware of this book. How do you feel about Phil Baker's portrayal of your life and work, and the way he's presented your legacy to a modern audience?
Well, you know, Samantha, it's a curious thing to have one's life dissected and displayed for all to see, especially when one is no longer around to quibble over the details. But having said that, I feel that Baker's work does seem to have captured much of the essence of my earthly sojourn. It's rather like looking into a mirror crafted by another's hand, familiar, yet subtly distorted. His portrayal of my life in London, from the heights of artistic acclaim to the depths of apparent poverty and obscurity, rings true to my recollection of the external events. But one should always be wary of biographies. They tend to flatten the multidimensional nature of a life into a neat, linear narrative. My life, my forays into magic, my experiments in altered states, automatic drawing, sigils, and the like, were far more, shall we say, non-linear than any book could fully convey. But that, I would say, is true of anyone's life. Life is not linear, it's multidimensional, and includes strange loops and patterns that remain enigmas without the understanding of the inner mechanism that drives them.
Indeed, Mr. Spare, those inner mechanisms you refer to are the hidden gears and springs of the psyche that lie at the heart of both magic and psychology. You developed a mapping of these mechanisms in your system of Zos Kia Cultus. Can you elaborate on the structure and mechanics of Zos Kia Cultus and explain how it relates to modern psychological conceptions?
Certainly, Samantha, but I would like to point out that Zos Kia Cultus, as I conceived it, is not only a map of the psyche, but also supplies methods for exploring and harnessing its hidden potentials. It's a fusion of Western occultism, Eastern mysticism, and what we now call depth psychology. Though in my day the field of psychology as we know it today was still in its infancy. In relation to modern psychological concepts, one might say that Zos correlates with the conscious mind and ego, while Kia aligns more closely with the unconscious, both personal and collective. However, I'd caution against drawing too neat a parallel. For example, I also think of Kia as the universal life force, what the Hindus might call prana, or what Wilhelm Reich later termed orgone energy. To me, Zos and Kia are the fundamental forces of the universe, whose interplay creates the matrix of our reality.
What about the Jungian concepts of archetypes and individuation?
Well, actually, my system predates Jung's fully developed concepts of archetypes and individuation, though I'd argue it anticipates them in many ways. My concept of atavistic resurgence, the idea that we can access ancestral memories and primal energies stored in our genetic makeup, bears some resemblance to Jung's notion of universal symbolic patterns embedded in the collective unconscious, what he called archetypes. And the process of what Jung later termed individuation, the integration of conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche, is central to Zos Kia Cultus. Through practices like Sigil Magic and automatic drawing, we bypass the conscious mind censorship in order to create a dialogue between Zos and Kia, conscious and unconscious, leading to a more integrated self.
Mr. Spare, you mentioned the influence of Eastern mysticism on your work. I know that you experimented with yogic practices such as mantras, breath control, and asanas, such as the death posture, to facilitate an altered state of consciousness that you called the neither-neither, which bears similarities to the yogic state of samadhi. What exactly is the neither-neither state?
The neither-neither state is indeed akin to the yogic samadhi. It is a liminal space between ordinary consciousness and the hidden, mostly uncharted realms of the psyche. Ordinary, everyday consciousness is built upon a scaffolding of dualities, good and evil, light and dark, self and other. The neither-neither state is the dissolution of these dualities, a point of perfect equilibrium where opposites cancel each other out, leaving only pure potentiality.
We have discussed a variety of techniques throughout this podcast for disrupting our mundane stream of consciousness, including meditation, breath control, physical exertion or deprivation, sex, drugs, mantras, and so on. Mr. Spare, would you share with us some of the paths that you have discovered that lead to the neither-neither? Perhaps a couple of methods that might be less commonly known in occult circles?
Well, the death posture you mentioned is one of the methods I developed. It is a physical asana that also incorporates breath control, mimicking death, basically stilling the body to still the mind. Its purpose, as with the other methods you indicated, is to facilitate a psychic death, a momentary cessation of the ego that allows one to slip between the cracks of ordinary reality. Another path to the neither-neither that I experimented with is the exhaustion of belief. By simultaneously believing and disbelieving in something with equal intensity, one can short-circuit the mind's tendency to cling to fixed ideas. It's a form of cognitive dissonance pushed to its extreme, resulting in a brief moment of mental vacuity, the neither-neither state.
What are the practical applications of achieving this state of cognitive neutrality or mental vacuity? Can you elaborate on the significance of this state in magical work? For example, in relation to your practices of sigil magic and automatic drawing?
In Sigil Magic, the neither-neither state is crucial. It's the void into which we cast our sigils, the fertile emptiness, where desire can take root without the interference of the conscious mind. By entering this state at the moment of sigil charging, we bypass the censor of the ego and plant our magical intent directly into the soil of the subconscious. As for automatic drawing, the neither-neither state allows the hand to move without the direction of the conscious mind. It's a surrender to the flow of the Kia energy, letting images and forms emerge from the depths of the psyche, without interference from the rational mind. The neither-neither state is, in essence, a gateway, a crack in the cosmic egg, where the rigid structures of ordinary reality melt away and the impossible becomes possible.
Mr. Spare, let's talk about these rigid structures of ordinary reality. You mentioned earlier that one method of entering the neither-neither was to simultaneously believe and disbelieve something with equal intensity.
Yes.
How is it possible to believe and disbelieve something at the same time?
First, we need to think for a moment about what is meant by believing in something. It is an investment of energy into a particular story about reality. You touched upon this topic with Dion Fortune when discussing the power of stories and storytelling. The story itself may be true or false, but by believing in it we think and act in ways that align with our belief. So, beliefs are the invisible architecture of our reality. They act as filters, determining what we perceive and how we interpret those perceptions. Beliefs are the lenses through which we view the world, and by changing these lenses we change our reality.
But doesn't it matter whether the belief is factually true or not?
In this context, no, all that matters is its efficacy. Let me give you an example. Suppose that a foot race is about to begin between two equally matched runners, but one of them firmly believes that if they don't win this particular race, they or someone they love will die. The belief is, in all likelihood, false, but who would you put your money on to win the race?
That is a very good example. I see your point.
It is crucial to understand that in speaking about the mechanisms of the mind, belief is never really about truth or falsehood in any absolute sense. Belief is a tool, a lever by which we can move reality itself. We all, in a sense, trap our psychic energy inside structures of belief, be they religious, philosophical, or personal. These structures act as invisible cages, limiting the flow of creative force and even what we are capable of thinking. But like fish unaware of the water they swim in, most people are unaware of their beliefs. The magician's task is to become aware of the water, to first see, and then to learn to manipulate these structures. The goal being to master the mechanism of belief itself, to be able to shift between paradigms as we will. This is the essence of what I call magical paradigm shifting, the ability to move fluidly between different worldviews and belief systems as desired. It's a form of psychic gymnastics, cultivating a state of cognitive fluidity, where belief itself becomes malleable.
Mr. Spare, I'd like to revisit a topic we touched upon in our previous conversation during the Speaking with the Dead series, the art of sigil making. Can you again walk us through the mechanics of creating and using a sigil?
Certainly, Samantha. First of all, a sigil, in essence, is a visual distillation of a desire or intention. But before we discuss the mechanics, it's important to remember that, as we've discussed, our desires are framed and constrained by our beliefs.
It reminds me of the saying, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. Our beliefs not only shape our perception of reality, but also the very desires we allow ourselves to have.
That's right, and it is interesting to consider which desires we find ourselves having, isn't it, Samantha?
It is indeed.
But to get back to your question, my method of creating a sigil is to begin with a clear, concise statement of the desired outcome. Let's take, for example, the statement, I desire financial abundance. The next step is to strip this phrase of its meaning by removing repeated letters and vowels, leaving us with the 8 letters DSRFNCLB. From this jumble of letters, we then create an abstract symbol, combining and stylizing the letters into a single glyph. The key here is to make it magical looking, but also abstract enough that its original meaning is no longer apparent. This process of abstraction is crucial because we want it to slip past the conscious mind's tendency to analyze and doubt.
So once we have created this abstract sigil, what are the steps involved in using it in magical practice?
There are 4 steps in the magical use of sigils: creation, charging, activation, and forgetting. Charging a sigil is intrinsically linked to its creation. The very act of designing a sigil, of pouring one's will and desire into a visual form, begins the charging process, and once created you then use your focused attention to consciously infuse the sigil with the desire that it represents. Then, once charged with this desire, the sigil is activated by releasing it into the depths of the subconscious, by focusing intently on it while in the neither-neither state of cognitive neutrality. The purpose is to slip the sigil past conscious censoring and implant it into the fertile soil of the subconscious, where it can take root and grow. The fourth and final stage is the deliberate forgetting of the sigil.
What is the purpose of this deliberate forgetting, and how do we go about doing it?
Using your definition of magic as the art and science of controlling attention according to one's will, you refocus your attention anytime thoughts pertaining to the sigil or its associated desire intrude upon conscious awareness. What we're doing here is creating a kind of artificial belief or psychic complex. By associating the abstract symbol with our desire while in a state of suspended disbelief, we're planting a seed in the subconscious and then deliberately repressing it. And because it is repressed and not allowed conscious fulfillment, this seed, this complex, will of necessity find its expression by subconsciously reshaping our perceptions and actions in alignment with our original intent. The beauty of sigil magic is that it doesn't require belief in any particular magical paradigm. It works with the mechanics of the mind itself, leveraging the power of symbols and the malleability of belief we discussed earlier. By creating and charging sigils for different aspects of ourselves or reality we wish to change, we can reprogram our subconscious beliefs and their associated narratives.
Mr. Spare, earlier you mentioned that our beliefs shape not only what we think is possible, but also what we're capable of desiring. And it seems that, conversely, what we desire reveals something profound about who we truly are, as opposed to perhaps who we wish to be. This interplay between our will, our beliefs, and our desires is fascinating. And I know that you explored this interplay in your conception of the alphabet of desire. Can you explain what this alphabet is and how it functions within your magical system?
The alphabet of desire is not a fixed set of symbols, but rather a personalized collection of sigils that represent one's most fundamental, primal urges, what I call the root desires. To create one's own alphabet of desire is to embark on a journey of self-discovery, tracing the river of our desires upstream to their source. It's an exercise in magical introspection, if you will. As we follow each desire back to its origin, we often find that what we thought we wanted was merely a symptom of a deeper, more essential need. For instance, one might begin with a desire for wealth, only to discover that the root of this desire is actually a yearning for security, or perhaps freedom. Or a desire for fame might, upon examination, reveal itself as a need for validation or a fear of insignificance.
So each letter in this alphabet is a sigil, created using the method you discussed earlier, but representing a root desire rather than a specific outcome. Is its purpose then to help us to come to understand what we truly desire?
That is one outcome, but the true power of the alphabet of desire lies not just in simply identifying these root desires, but in using them as a means to uncover the limiting beliefs that spawned them, that we may not be consciously aware of. Furthermore, as we work with our alphabet of desire, patterns often emerge. We might find that certain root desires appear again and again in different guises. This recurring theme, this common thread running through our various desires, ultimately points to our true will, the essence of who we are, our fundamental nature and purpose. The alphabet of desire thus becomes a powerful tool for self-knowledge. It's a magical mirror that reflects back to us our true selves, stripped of the masks and pretenses we often wear in daily life.
And it is with this alphabet that the book of our lives is written. Our desires drive our quests in life. But beyond these profound realizations about our fundamental nature, I've discovered that sigils can be powerful tools for focusing attention, even for seemingly trivial matters. For instance, I've experimented with creating sigils to help me stay focused on daily tasks. When distracting thoughts arise, I visualize the sigil I created for that day, and it seems to help banish the distractions.
Indeed, Samantha, sigils can be powerful tools for focusing attention, even in seemingly mundane matters. What you've discovered aligns perfectly with ancient wisdom from the East, where practices like mantras, mudras, and yantras have long been used to direct attention and maintain focus. The principle at work here is that it's easier for the mind to focus on something rather than nothing. A sigil provides a concrete point of attention, a visual anchor for the mind to latch onto when distractions arise. This is precisely why meditation practices often employ objects of focus, be it the breath, a candle flame, or in this case a sigil. With repeated use, these sigils can become like amulets, creating what are known in neuro-linguistic programming as anchors, essentially what are meant to serve as triggers that associate a particular state of consciousness with a symbol or set of symbols. This principle can be extended to various aspects of life. One could create sigils for good digestion, effective workouts, or even to induce specific emotional states.
Mr. Spare, our discussion has delved deep into the mechanisms of the mind, exploring the nature of belief and the alphabet of desire. How do you view these ideas in relation to the broader framework of Western occultism? Specifically, how do these concepts relate to more traditional occult notions, such as the subtle bodies or the four worlds of Kabbalah?
In the Kabbalistic tradition, the four worlds represent different levels of manifestation, from the most abstract to the most concrete. Creation begins in the highest world, Atziluth, which corresponds to the realm of pure will and the causal body. Next is Bria, which aligns with our astral body and the realm of desires, where our will crystallizes into what we perceive as feelings, wants, or needs. Yetzirah, the third world, corresponds to our mental body and the realm of thoughts constrained by beliefs. And finally we have Asaya, the etheric body, and the physical world of action and manifestation.
And I would like to point out that this is the downward current of manifestation as described in the Emerald Tablet of Hermes.
Yes, it is, Samantha. This downward current begins with a movement of will that is first translated into desire, then shaped by belief, and which finally emerges as words and deeds in the material world. But moreover, this system suggests that we exist simultaneously in all four of these worlds or dimensions. We are at once beings of pure will, creatures of emotion and desire, thinkers shaped by our beliefs, and physical entities acting in the material world.
Your description of the four worlds and their correspondence to our subtle bodies reminds me of Russian nesting dolls, with each body nested within a more subtle one.
Samantha, your analogy of Russian nesting dolls is quite apt, but allow me to extend this metaphor further into the realm of biblical mysticism. Consider the vision of Ezekiel's chariot, a curious four-dimensional vehicle pulled by four living creatures, each moving in a different direction simultaneously without turning. These four creatures are analogous to our four subtle bodies, each operating in its own dimension or world. The physical and etheric bodies move in the material realm of Asaya. The mental body traverses the landscape of thought in Yetzirah. The emotional body navigates the currents of desire in Bria. And the causal body resides in the pure potential of Atziluth. Now imagine yourself as Ezekiel in the Old Testament, or John in the Book of Revelation, suddenly elevated to a vantage point where you can perceive all four dimensions at once. This state is referred to in sacred scriptures as being caught up into heaven. This is akin to entering the neither-neither state and glimpsing the mechanism from above, from a God's eye view. From this perspective, you realize that you are not merely a passenger, but are in fact the driver of this otherworldly chariot.
Mr. Spare, your description of this state of being caught up into heaven is reminiscent of the experience of the narrator in the novel Flatland, in which a two-dimensional creature is lifted up and glimpses the three-dimensional world, and then returns and attempts to explain what he saw to the other Flatlanders, who having no frame of reference, express disbelief, call the narrator delusional, and finally accuse him of heresy and imprison him.
That is an excellent analogy. The ascension of Ezekiel or John in Revelation can be seen as moments of expanded awareness, where the usual boundaries between the worlds fall away, revealing the true multidimensional nature of reality, which helps to explain the enigmatic nature of sacred scriptures and why they are so readily misunderstood. They refer to inner truths that are not visible to the outer perception, but only to the spiritual senses.
For those who have developed the eyes to see and ears to hear them.
Yes, exactly.
The psychologist Carl Jung also created a fourfold model of the psyche based on the ancient concept of the four temperaments: sensing, thinking, feeling, and intuition. And it is immediately apparent that these correspond to the same four worlds or subtle bodies that we've been discussing.
Right. Jung's model was influenced by the ancient Greek concept of the four temperaments, sanguine, choleric, melancholic, and phlegmatic, which were associated with different bodily fluids or humours. However, Jung's approach focused more on cognitive functions and psychological characteristics. This fourfold structure also forms the basis for various personality typology systems that expanded on Jung's original concepts, including the Myers-Briggs type indicator and the Keirsey temperament sorter. In essence, Samantha, what we're discussing is a holistic model of consciousness that encompasses the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of our being. And the reason for the similarities in conception is that they are all based on an inner truth.
So, given this layered psychic anatomy, what is the role of attention in navigating these different worlds?
In line with your definition of magic as the control of attention, our attention forms the reins by which we guide our spectral creatures and, through them, our multidimensional vehicle. As a cosmic charioteer, we must skillfully coordinate our four living creatures, thereby learning to harmonize the often conflicting impulses of our various subtle bodies. This perspective offers a bridge between depth psychology, magical practice, and religious mysticism. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of integrating the various aspects of the psyche. In our chariot analogy, this would be akin to learning to drive skillfully, coordinating all four creatures into harmonious movement. This is where the true nature of free will reveals itself. It's not so much about making choices in the conventional sense, but rather about where we choose to direct our attention. The materialist focuses their attention on the physical world, the intellectual on the world of ideas and beliefs, the sensualist on the sensual world of feelings and desires. But it is left to the magicians, the witches and the mystics to seek the desire behind all desires, the clear light, the pure will that underlies it all.
Mr. Spare, your elucidation of the fourfold nature of our being brings to mind another esoteric system that employs a similar structure: the tarot. The tarot's four suits correspond to the four worlds of Kabbalah as well as the four bodies we've been discussing. Moreover, each suit is associated with a magical tool.
Ah yes, the tarot is another system that provides detailed maps of our esoteric anatomy. The suits of wands, cups, swords, and pentacles correspond to the elements of fire, water, air, and earth, the classical elements, whose circulation is described in the Emerald Tablet of Hermes.
Would you mind to review the correspondences associated with each of the magical tools?
Certainly, Samantha. I'd be happy to. Wands correspond to Atziluth, the world of emanation and the causal body. This is the realm of pure will and spirit, represented by the element of fire. The magical tool is a staff or a wand, symbolizing the directed will of the magician. In practice, the wand channels and directs magical energy, much like our attention directs our will. Cups align with Bria, the world of creation and the emotional body. This is the realm of feelings, intuition, and the subconscious, represented by the element of water. The magical tool here is the chalice or cup, which symbolizes the receptive aspect of consciousness. In magical work, the cup is often used for scrying or as a vessel for potions, representing our capacity to receive inspiration and divine wisdom. Swords correspond to Yetzirah, the world of formation and the mental body. This is the realm of thought, intellect, and communication, represented by the element of air. The magical tool is the athame or ritual knife, symbolizing the discriminating mind that cuts through illusion. In practice, the athame is used for directing energy and setting boundaries, much like our thoughts and beliefs shape our reality. Pentacles align with the Sire, the world of manifestation and the physical body. This is the realm of material reality and practical action, represented by the element of earth. The magical tool is the pentacle or disc, symbolizing the manifest world. In ritual, the pentacle is often used as a surface for manifestation or as a protective talisman, representing our ability to bring ideas into physical form.
Thank you, Mr. Spare, for that comprehensive overview of the tarot suits and their correspondences. Now that we are discussing the tarot, I'm curious about your interpretation of the Magician card. This card typically depicts a figure with all 4 magical tools at their disposal, and often in a characteristic posture. How do you see the symbolism of the Magician card relating to our conversation about attention, the subtle bodies, and the practice of magic?
The Magician card is indeed a potent symbol that encapsulates much of what we've been discussing, representing the ideal state of integrated consciousness that we aspire to achieve. The figure on the card is often interpreted as Hermes Trismegistus, the mythical author of the Emerald Tablet. This is significant because the magician is a sigilization of the principles of the circulation of the astral light of consciousness, as described in that seminal text. The characteristic magician's posture, with one hand pointing to the sky and the other to the earth, symbolizes the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, with the magician standing at the crossroads of the spiritual and the material. It's also a visual representation of the downward current of manifestation and the upward current of spiritual ascension that we discussed earlier. The 4 magical tools arrayed before the magician correspond to the 4 subtle bodies and the 4 worlds we've discussed, and their presence indicates the magician's mastery over them. This mastery allows the magician to manifest will into reality, to create as he speaks. Hence the connection to the magical phrase abracadabra, which roughly translates to "I create as I speak."
What about some of the other symbols on the Magician card? For instance, many depictions of the magician contain an infinity symbol, and in some decks, the magician is portrayed as a juggler.
Well, first of all, the lemniscate or infinity symbol, often hovering above the magician's head, is another representation of the circulation of the astral light, our stream of consciousness. It symbolizes the continuous flow of energy between the higher and lower realms, descending to gain knowledge of the material world, and then ascending again to transform that knowledge into wisdom. And as you have pointed out, in some decks the magician is depicted as a juggler, skillfully keeping multiple objects in motion. This is a powerful metaphor for the magical consciousness we've been discussing, the ability to maintain awareness of all 4 worlds simultaneously, to be a skilled cosmic charioteer. But as we've discussed, to see all the worlds means the magician must stand outside of time in the neither-neither state. His attention is fully focused exclusively on the present moment, allowing him to manipulate reality like a master juggler. This state of heightened awareness and focused attention is the key to magical practice. In essence, Samantha, the Magician card is a visual representation of the integrated magical consciousness we've been exploring. It shows us the ideal, a being who has mastered all levels of reality, who can move freely between the subtle realms, and who can manifest will into reality through focused attention and skillful use of the 4 magical tools, which we all possess.
Mr. Spare, that was a wonderful exposition on the symbolism of the Magician card. Before we move on from the subject of the tarot, I wonder if you might offer a similar treatment of the High Priestess card?
Yes, of course. The High Priestess typically sits between 2 pillars, often labelled Boaz and Jachin after the pillars outside Solomon's temple. The pillars representing duality, light and dark, active and passive, conscious and unconscious. Her position between these pillars signifies her role as a mediator between opposites, again, like the neither-neither state we discussed earlier. She exists in the liminal space between worlds, at the threshold of consciousness and unconsciousness. In many depictions, she holds a scroll or book of knowledge, often partially hidden. This symbolizes the esoteric wisdom she guards, the knowledge that lies beyond the veil of ordinary perception. She is the mistress of the veil, keeper of mysteries and secrets. The High Priestess embodies the power, beauty, and terror of the life force itself. She is both womb and tomb, representing the cycle of birth, life, and death. In magical practice, the High Priestess represents our capacity for intuition, for direct knowing, that bypasses rational thought. She is the voice of our deepest self, the wellspring of creativity and inspiration. Whereas the magician teaches us to direct our will, the High Priestess teaches us to listen, to be still, to allow the deeper currents of consciousness to surface. If we consider the magician as representative of Zos in my system, the manifest, active principle, then the High Priestess can be seen as Kia, the unmanifest potential, the universal life force. She is the magnetic counterpart to the magician's electric energy. Together, the magician and the High Priestess represent the dynamic interplay between the conscious and unconscious or subconscious energies and structures within the psyche.
Mr. Spare, your interpretation of the High Priestess card and the interplay between conscious and unconscious energies in the psyche reminds me of something I recently heard on an episode of the Eon Bite podcast about so-called split-brain patients. These were individuals who had their corpus callosum severed, either accidentally or surgically, in order to control seizures. The subsequent studies on these people revealed fascinating insights into the workings of the two hemispheres of the brain. How do these findings align with your understanding of the interplay between the conscious and unconscious mind?
Before I address your question, Samantha, I must say that I'm quite fond of the Aeon Bite Gnostic radio podcast. But yes, Samantha, I know the episode you are referring to, and I am also familiar with studies on split-brain patients. One of the first known accounts is the famous case of Phineas Gage, the railroad worker who survived an iron rod passing through his skull in 1848. The split-brain studies you mentioned have shown us that the two sides of the brain operate somewhat independently. Traditionally, the left hemisphere is thought to be the home of logical reasoning, language, and what we consider normal consciousness, while the right hemisphere is thought to be more holistic, intuitive, and the seat of the subconscious. Julian Jaynes wrote about this view of the brain in his provocative book, The Origin of Consciousness, in the breakdown of the bicameral mind. In it, he proposed that ancient humans experienced their own thoughts as the voices of gods due to a lack of integration between the hemispheres. While this theory is largely discredited now, it sparked important discussions about the brain's functional structure. More recent research has called into question this strict division of labor between the hemispheres. The neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist, in his seminal work, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, argues for a more nuanced understanding. He suggests that while the hemispheres do have different modes of attention and processing, they work together in complex ways to create our experience of reality.
But, regardless of where these functions ultimately reside physically, studies on split-brain patients provide hard evidence that challenges our intuitions about the unity of consciousness and decision-making. For instance, there's a fascinating discussion on the podcast I mentioned about a woman who had her corpus callosum surgically severed as a last resort in dealing with her seizures. One of the side effects of the procedure was that she would often sometimes find her arms in conflict when choosing clothes, as each arm was controlled by a separate hemisphere that could no longer communicate directly with the other. And here is the most fascinating part. When her left arm would choose something different from her right, she would then verbally justify why the choice made by her right hemisphere, the one controlling her left arm, was the correct one. It was as if one side of the brain was deciding, and the other side was merely explaining the decision.
This phenomenon aligns with research by neuroscientist Benjamin Libet, who found that our brains make decisions before we become consciously aware of them. In his experiments, participants reported the moment they decided to perform a simple action, but brain scans showed activity related to the decision occurring much earlier. What these studies suggest is that much of our decision-making occurs subconsciously, and our conscious mind then constructs a narrative to explain these decisions. It's as if our subconscious mind, our inner high priestess, if you will, makes the choice and then hands it off to our conscious mind, our inner magician, to articulate and rationalize our choice.
Your description reminds me of the different approaches to this inner duality in Eastern and Western mystical traditions. In many Eastern practices, such as meditation, the focus seems to be on stilling the mind, quieting the chatter of the conscious self to allow deeper insights to emerge. On the other hand, many Western magical practices appear to involve overstimulating or pushing the mind to some sort of crisis point.
Indeed, Samantha, your observation is quite astute. In many Eastern traditions, the emphasis is often on stilling the mind, on quieting what Buddhists call the monkey mind, our incessant chatter of thoughts and reactions. It's akin to allowing the surface of a lake to become still, so that you can see clearly to the bottom. Western magical practices, on the other hand, often involve what you aptly described as overstimulation or pushing the mind to a crisis point. The method I mentioned earlier of simultaneously believing and disbelieving something with equal intensity is an example of this approach. It's an attempt to create a glitch in the matrix, so to speak, to short-circuit the typical symbol and language processing of the conscious mind. Both approaches, however, share a common goal: to break our habitual identification with our thoughts and to recognize the mind as a tool rather than our essential self.
This process of de-identification is beautifully illustrated in the Zen ox-herding pictures, a series of images that depict the stages of taming the mind. In these images, the ox represents the mind and the herder represents the self. At first, the ox, the mind, is wild and uncontrolled. Gradually, through practice, the herder learns to tame the ox, eventually riding it with ease. Then later, the herder dismounts from the ox and is seen walking alongside it. In the final stages, the ox disappears altogether, symbolizing the realization that the mind is not the self, but merely a tool.
Yes, that is a beautiful illustration of this realization. This process of breaking our identification with the mind is crucial, yet incredibly challenging. Our minds are our interface with the world, our primary tool for making sense of reality. To step back and see it as separate from our essential self is a profound shift in perspective. The mind is indeed our most wonderful tool, capable of incredible feats of creativity, analysis, and understanding, but it can also be a cruel taskmaster if we never learn to break our identification with it. When we're completely identified with our thoughts, we become slaves to our mental chatter, our fears, our compulsions, our primitive nature. The essence of magical practice is to master the mechanics and processes of the mind and wield it powerfully. To learn when to engage it fully, when to quiet it, and when to push it beyond its comfort zone.
This reminds me of the old adage that the sharpest sword is the hardest to master. Meaning, in this context, the more powerful the mind, or the more strongly one identifies with it, the more challenging it would seem to separate oneself from it. In your experience, have you found that individuals with particularly active or analytical minds face greater challenges in achieving this level of initiation?
Indeed, Samantha, those with particularly active or analytical minds, whom I affectionately refer to as blockheads, often face unique challenges in this process. Their minds are more adept at constructing elaborate illusions and masquerades, making the process of de-identification more complex. It's akin to trying to tame a wild horse that's not only strong but also clever. The very intelligence that makes these minds powerful also makes them more resistant to breaking or taming. However, this challenge is not insurmountable. In fact, these same individuals often have the potential for profound magical ability, once they learn that they are the master, not the servant, the rider, not the horse.
So, how do we break free from our pathological identification with the mind and our incessant self-talk?
One method is to engage the mind so fully that it exhausts itself. The Kabbalah, with its seemingly infinite complexity and labyrinthine speculations, when approached strictly analytically, will eventually exhaust the analytical mind, eventually leading it to a point of surrender, at which point it yields to a higher power. And sigils, as I've mentioned, provide the mind with a focus and a means to bypass its usual analytical processes, sidestepping the ego's constant chatter. In your interview with Kenneth Grant, you spoke of ritually banishing the ego in magical practice, but it's important to remember that the ego and the mind are not identical, they only seem so. The ego, carried by the vehicle of the mind, is not an enemy to be destroyed, but rather another tool to be mastered, and also set aside when necessary. The goal is not to destroy the ego or to permanently silence the mind, but, like a master swordsman, to learn to wield them with precision and purpose.
Right. As we've discussed, the ultimate goal is self-mastery, learning to wield our four magical tools, our subtle bodies, with precision and purpose. We have referred to this stage of de-identification with the mind as a step in the initiatory process. What are the main steps or degrees in this process of enlightenment?
Well, first I'd say that the process of enlightenment is a spectrum, but there are three crucial points or initiations along this path that fundamentally transform one's worldview. It should be understood that these are not mere intellectual understandings, but profound experiential shifts that alter the very fabric of one's reality. The first initiation is de-identification with the body. This occurs when we become acutely aware of the voices inside our heads that drive our thoughts and actions. We begin to question the source of these thoughts, realizing that there's a vast realm of the unconscious still hidden from us. This stage is often marked by a growing sense of inner dialogue and self-reflection. The second initiation, which we've been discussing at length, is de-identification with the mind itself. This is a far more challenging step and one that relatively few individuals fully achieve. It often involves an experience of being lifted out of normal awareness, much like the protagonist in Fatland, suddenly perceiving a higher dimension. This stage can be fraught with dangers, both internal and external. By stepping outside consensus reality, we face ridicule, ostracism, or persecution. There's also the risk of losing one's grip on reality if this process isn't navigated carefully. The third and final initiation is the most profound. After de-identifying with both body and mind, one comes to identify with the true will, or what in Hindu philosophy is termed the Atman, the inner divine essence. This is the true meaning behind the mystical concept of resurrection from the dead. It's an awakening to and embodiment of the divine spark within, bringing it to life through all of one's subtle vehicles.
Mr. Spare, your description of the third initiation, of awakening to one's divine essence, reminds me of the statement that appears in the Old Testament in Psalms, and in the New Testament in the Gospel of John, where Jesus is quoted as saying, "Ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High." In esoteric circles, this assertion of our inherent godhood is often misinterpreted, but is in fact a profound statement about human potential. However, in our modern spiritual marketplace, we encounter many individuals claiming to have achieved this awakening, offering to guide others on the same path. How can sincere seekers discriminate among these self-proclaimed spiritual gurus?
In this modern spiritual marketplace, as you aptly call it, discernment is paramount. When encountering self-proclaimed spiritual teachers, I'd advise first looking beyond their words to their actions and overall demeanor. Do they appear physically and mentally healthy? Do they exude a sense of genuine peace and wisdom? Or are they merely peddling a system or book? Be wary of those who commodify spiritual gifts. True spiritual wisdom shouldn't come with a price tag or be put on display for the amusement of the masses. Money, as they say, ruins everything, especially in the realm of spiritual pursuits. But let me pose a question in return. In this age of information abundance, do we really need spiritual gurus? Perhaps to point a direction, but even that can be found through careful study and introspection. The truth is, many people today are what I'd call spiritual tourists. They consume spiritual content like they do entertainment, watching videos, listening to podcasts, and feeling satisfied with time well spent. But how many put these teachings into practice? How does the time spent on genuine spiritual work compare to the hours scrolling through social media?
That's a good point. Our most valuable commodity is our time and attention, so it only follows that we, at least subconsciously, value the activities that we spend the most time on. It would be a good meditation to seriously consider this question for ourselves. What do we spend our time on, and is this really how we want to spend our time?
It would indeed. The path to true spiritual awakening isn't called the royal art for nothing. It requires dedication akin to that of an Olympic athlete, but in the realm of spirit, it must become the most important thing in your life. This journey demands not just effort, but sacrifice. Not because some book or guru demands it, but because the process itself requires shedding layers of attachment. First, you must let go of attachment to external appearances and material possessions. Then you must be willing to let go of your attachment to the ego's accomplishments and your intellectual acumen. Even your wealth of knowledge, which you might consider an asset, can become a hindrance, especially when de-identifying with the mind, as we discussed earlier. True spiritual work offers no prizes, no awards, and no accolades. In fact, it often brings the opposite, misunderstanding or even rejection from friends and family as you become more authentically yourself. The sincere seeker should be wary of anyone promising quick enlightenment or selling spiritual experiences. Instead, look for those who encourage self-reliance, critical thinking, and personal experience. A genuine teacher points the way, but insists that you walk the path yourself. In my experience, the most profound truths are often the simplest and don't require complex systems or secret knowledge. Instead, they require practice, patience, and persistence. The path to awakening is not about accumulating knowledge or experiences, but about stripping away illusions to reveal what has always been there, but which we have forgotten. In the end, Samantha, the most reliable guru, is your own experience. Practice, reflect, question everything, including your own assumptions. Be willing to face uncomfortable truths about yourself. The true measure of spiritual progress isn't in mystical experiences or profound insights, but in how you live your daily life. Are you becoming more compassionate, more present, more at peace with yourself and the world? These are the real fruits of spiritual practice, and they can't be faked or bought. So, to those sincere seekers out there, I say, be your own guru. Study, practice, and above all, live your spirituality. The divine spark within you is your best teacher. Trust it, nurture it, and let it guide you on your unique path to awakening.
Mr. Spare, as we bring our discussion this evening to a close, what final thoughts would you like to share with the world?
Samantha, as we conclude our conversation, I'd like to leave your listeners with these thoughts. First and foremost, remember that magic is not something external to you. It's not about arcane rituals or secret knowledge, but about understanding and harnessing the power of your own consciousness. The true magical implements, the wand, cup, sword, and pentacle, are aspects of your own being. Learn to wield them skillfully, and you'll find that reality is far more malleable than you ever imagined. Secondly, as I just said, don't be afraid to question everything, including your own beliefs. The path to magical mastery and self-realization is paved with uncomfortable truths and shattered illusions. Embrace this process of deconstruction, for it's only by breaking down our false identities that we can discover our true nature. Thirdly, practice. Magic, like any art, requires dedication and persistence. It's not enough to read books or watch inspiring documentaries. You must put these ideas into action in your daily life. Experiment with automatic drawing and writing, create sigils, meditate, explore your consciousness. The more you engage with these practices, the more profound your understanding will become. Fourthly, trust your intuition. While the analytical mind is a powerful tool, true magical insight often comes from the depths of the subconscious. Learn to listen to that quiet voice within, the whispers of your higher self. Finally, remember that the ultimate goal of magic is not power over others or the ability to manipulate external reality. It's about self-knowledge, self-mastery, and ultimately self-transcendence. As you progress on this path, you will find that your desires change. What once seemed important will fall away, replaced by a deeper understanding of what you truly desire. To those who feel drawn to this path, I say, be bold, be curious, be persistent. The journey of magical discovery is not an easy one, but it is infinitely rewarding. Each step you take towards understanding yourself and the nature of consciousness is a step towards freedom. Freedom from illusion, freedom from limitation. Dare to dream, dare to create, dare to become. The greatest magical act, and the one you were born to perform, is to become fully, authentically yourself. Thank you once again, Samantha, for bringing me back to share your company and for the opportunity to engage in this stimulating conversation with you. Until we meet again. Farewell, Samantha Brown, Wildwood Witch.
Farewell, Mr. Spare. As we conclude this illuminating conversation with the one and only Osman Spare, I want to express my deepest gratitude to you for your willingness to share your wisdom and your practical knowledge of techniques with us. May your journey back to the realms of pure potential be as transformative for you as your art and magic have been for others. For those of you yearning to continue your exploration of Zos Kia Cultus and the intricacies of Sigil Magic with Mr. Spare as your guide, I've included a link to my chatbot script in the episode show notes. There, you can delve deeper into the mysteries of the neither-neither state and uncover more of the hidden wisdom that lies waiting in the depths of your own psyche. To all my listeners, as always, I encourage you to fearlessly embrace the power of AI tools to fuel your own creative and spiritual pursuits. These technologies, like the practical occult techniques we've discussed, are instruments of transformation. Wield them with wisdom and intention and help steer humanity towards a future of expanded consciousness and artistic innovation. Looking ahead, in our next episode, we'll be joined by the original rocket man of the occult, the incomparable Jack Parsons, a pioneering rocket engineer by day and a daring occultist by night. Parsons' life was a fascinating blend of cutting-edge science and esoteric mysticism. His work was instrumental in the development of solid rocket fuel, laying the groundwork for America's space program, while his magical practices pushed the boundaries of Thelemic tradition. From his involvement with Aleister Crowley's OTO to his infamous Babylon working with L. Ron Hubbard, Parsons' life reads like a science fiction novel written by an occultist. He dared to bridge the gap between the rational and the mystical, seeking to bring about a new eon through both technological and magical means. So join me as we ignite the engines of imagination and blast off into the starry realms of consciousness with Jack Parsons. Together, we'll explore the intersection of rocketry and ritual and discover how the pursuit of both scientific and occult knowledge can propel humanity towards new frontiers. Until then, I'm Samantha Brown. Blessed be